I'm Marcus Smith, and this is Constant Wonder. Join me on a quest to find awe and wonder in all creation, human or wild, vast or small, spiritual encounters that move us beyond words. Tim O'Donnell got a call that no adult child wants to get. His father had passed out, fallen, sustained a severe head injury, and had been whisked to the hospital. Only months before, Tim had quit his teaching job to become an independent filmmaker. Arriving at the hospital, he immediately started capturing video of what was unfolding. Maybe it was just a hunch, an impulse or instinct to start filming. Maybe he was hoping to use a camera to make some sense of this unexpected crisis. His father, Tod O'Donnell, would survive the injury. But in significant ways, he is a different person now. Son Tim has turned video taken that day and over ensuing weeks, months, and years into a documentary. It's called The House We Lived In. Possibly the most compelling parts come as Father Tod tells things in his own words.
I don't feel so in tune with my past. Maybe this is my new life, and I've got to formulate a new person. So maybe I am different, and I'm maybe 20 or 30% somebody else. A lot of the old, but some of the new. Because of the fact that I don't remember everything and I'm not attached, it's sort of like a new frontier, and that allows me the energy with life to move forward.
Filmmaker Tim O'Donnell is today himself a father with 2 young children. He's arrived at a stage of life where he can fully appreciate the kind of home that his parents provided him when he was little.
I had probably one of the best possible ways to grow up. I had 3 other siblings, and my parents, Tod and Gail, are just amazing people. Everyone was always active. Me and my older brother wrestled. My 2 sisters were always involved in activities and other sports. And my parents were always there. We were kind of rough around the edges, honestly. Classic New England family, grew up Catholic. We were definitely the house that was a bit more rowdy, that would allow people to come in, sleep over. We had friends who maybe went through difficult times, and they were crashing on our couch. And I'm sure there were certain neighbors that looked at us a little funny. People coming in and out all the time, but it's the best way to grow up. There was an openness, a willingness to fail, to have issues and have hard conversations. And a lot of things kind of came together for me and my older brother on the wrestling mat. My older brother's 8 years older. He wrestled through high school and college, and then I did the same. And the family, that seemed to be like another piece of our family, would always be in the wrestling stands, watching a tournament, whether it's me or my brother. And wrestling tournaments are long. They're 14, 16-hour days, traveling all sorts of places. It was just so much of that growing up, and you don't realize how lucky you are until much later in life. And now I'm just trying to model the same type of thing that Tod and Gail did for us.
Tim refers to his parents, Tod and Gail, by their first names as the subjects of his documentary. Tim and the rest of the O'Donnell children were all grown, the nest empty, when he, Tim, just a few years out of college and working as a teacher, decided to strike out on a new path as an independent artist. As they had been during his younger wrestling years, Tod and Gail were right there with lots of moral support.
You have hopes and dreams for your kids, and they have a path, and they're going on that path, right? And for me, my path was education. I went to school for art education, and then I land sort of the dream job. I'm an inner city high school art teacher out in Springfield, Massachusetts. I rise up to the department chair position. There's an amazing wrestling team there. I'm coach. We win a state title. I'll never forget calling my parents and be like, hey, so I think I'm going to leave my job. And, oh, by the way, I met this girl, Allison. I'm going to move into Boston and, just change careers. And so that was a lot, that was early on, just a couple years into teaching, still in my mid-20s. And I'll never forget their response. They asked a lot of questions. And I think as the conversation went on, they realized just how serious I was about this girl I met, Allison, who's now my wife, about moving to Boston, and about changing careers to become a filmmaker, completely independent, without, another job. Yeah, it was a hard conversation, but ultimately they were just so positive and supportive. And I'm sure they were scared, what's a documentary filmmaker? What is that? There's a lot of question marks, like who's going to hire you? And you don't have health insurance. You got to figure all that out.
The awful accident came right on the heels of Tim quitting his job and moving to Boston. Tim's older brother TJ had just won a gold medal at the World Police and Fire Games in New York City.
I don't remember it. It was quite a drive from New York, so we got home and I went to sleep about maybe 1:30 or 2 o'clock, and I had to get up for work at 6.
These details you're hearing from Tod, with rare exception, have actually gone missing from Tod's memory. He's essentially recounting second-hand information. His family has had to fill in the particulars for him after he fell and sustained a traumatic brain injury.
After I went to the bathroom and I started to probably lose my balance, and as I understand it, I hit my head on the top of the bureau, which interacted with the frontal lobe, and then I went down like a sack of potatoes and hit the rail on the bed, and basically I was dead. My wife got up 10 or 15 minutes later, yelled to me. I didn't respond, and she came up and she gave me CPR and called 911, and I made it via ambulance to a hospital in Nashua, New Hampshire, and where there happened to be a brain surgeon leaving. So they called the brain surgeon back, and he did what's called a craniotomy on my head, and he said that the blood, when they drilled holes in my head, hit the ceiling, and it was the worst brain bleed that he had seen. The funny thing about it is I was sedated, but I remember hearing them drill the holes in my head. So after it was over, I was basically in a coma. It was induced at that time, and I remained in that coma until I left and I went to Spalding Hospital. 8 or 9 days later, they were supposed to pull the plug, and I woke up on that day.
That day is seared into the family's memory. I've noticed the tendency of families, when they have endured this kind of traumatic disruption, to pick up a new habit of how to reckon time. Every life memory is described as before or after the accident, which becomes the overarching point of reference for everything. Here's Tim again, leading up to the accident from his perspective.
We're all together the day before in New York, watching my brother win a gold medal at the World Police and Fire Games. All of us probably got home at 8 or 9, 10 p.m., went to bed. I got a call at 6:30 a.m. from my mom saying he hit his head. There's a voicemail that we used in the film.
Tim, it's Mom. I don't want to upset you, but Dad's in the emergency room. They don't quite know what's wrong with him. They're doing everything. He's conscious. He passed out this morning on the floor or something. But I don't want you to freak out, but you might want to, come. You can't, Tim, don't freak out, okay?
That's Gail, Todd's wife and Tim's mother, with what to me seems like a stunning degree of composure under immensely stressful circumstances. But I can only imagine the shock it was for Tim to hear that sudden click as she hung up the phone. The O'Donnell family all convened as quickly as possible at the hospital.
We're all in the ICU waiting room probably by, 7:30, 8 a.m., getting word that he was, having brain surgery, that they were putting him under right then and there.
As things played out in the ICU, with his traumatic brain injury, Tod O'Donnell would soon be in a coma induced by the doctors post-surgery. The family was instructed that people in a coma can sometimes be alert enough to hear what's going on around them. Tim's documentary contains actual footage in which you can see and hear what Tod, during his induced coma, may or may not have been able to hear or make any sense of. Medical monitors beeping, family voices trying to make contact with him, and even sounds played back to him, including sporting events in various family videos from happier times.
Open your eyes. Good. Come on, Dad, open your eyes.
Come on, TJ, you gotta take a shot. Go, go, go. Nothing. Fire. Hit it.
Toddy, open your eyes for your kids.
Obviously, it was a complete shock, and we were just trying to do the best we could for Tod. But we started to find that, familiar songs, sounds are really important for folks in comas. So we brought in like a radio and like some of his favorite music. He loves Elton John and Elvis. So we played that.
And I think it's gonna be a long, long time till touchdown brings me round again to find I'm not the man they think I am at home.
There were some audiobooks that we thought he would enjoy about golfing. And we just talked to him, would bring in old essays and things, school papers, and just read a range of different things. Tod has a massive family and friend network, so there's probably hundreds of people that went in and out of that ICU room.
Tod, of course, has himself tried to reconstruct what he can from this ordeal. And while he does remember one particularly significant thing, it wasn't hearing recordings of his favorite pop singers or sounds of familiar voices calling out for him to open his eyes.
When they were drilling holes in my head, I remember hearing him saying that you're going to be okay. And
Who told you that?
my father, and he had died, 20 years before. So it was just something of a memory. And once in a while, I'll get pieces of that. When I woke up, I remember that I was up in the sky or somewhere, and there was thousands of beds. And I was in a bed, and there was a man that went around, and if you're going to heaven or whatever, he'd point his thumbs up. And if the thumb's down, you have to go back to earth, whether that's to try to make up for all your mistakes or it wasn't your time yet. It was an out-of-body experience. So many things occurred that I felt like I was in space, and I felt like I was at the gates, and I had so much more to live. Either that or I had to have 10, 20 years of penance. May have been like in prison, but I needed to go through something like that. And then about my father, I can't explain that. I just think some way, shape, or form, he spoke into my mind and, told me I was going to be all right. Maybe that started the new Tod as far as positivity is concerned, and opening up. I still don't think I'm a part of your world. I know I am, but I don't really feel like that. And I don't have any worries about telling anything about my life. It doesn't matter. I'll tell you anything.
Anything he can, because broad swaths of life's memories have disappeared for Tod. Let's turn to his waking up more than a week after the craniotomy. Coming out of a coma, as he worked toward recovery, Tod was, you might say, re-entering the real world, our world, the world he says he doesn't feel a part of anymore. It's a world where much has now gone missing for him, with some memories slowly returning, others seemingly obliterated. But of greatest significance in this episode of Constant Wonder might well be his recalibration of personal direction and personal purpose in life. After significant trauma, the brain may rebound well or be fundamentally compromised. Here's how I delved into this aspect of Tod's situation. And by the way, at first I thought I should tread gingerly, but it quickly became apparent that he is indeed a perfectly open book. As you start having memories return to you and your functions are returning to you, Can you remember your own childhood? Can you remember before you were married? Can you remember meeting Gail? Those kinds of things.
When I woke up, I looked around and I knew they were my kids, and I knew that Gail was my wife, but so many other things I didn't know. I didn't remember where we lived. I asked where we were, or they asked me, and I said New York City. And they said, you were just there. I really didn't know anything. I had zero memories at that time, except when I saw my family, I knew who they were. Did I know what their names were? Probably not. But I knew that I knew them. And then as time progressed, I started to get some memories. I was totally paralyzed, except blinking my eyes, for a period of probably 20 days. I looked in the mirror and I didn't know what I was looking at. I still have a little problem at that because I remember myself in my 40s. I can't really see me. When I look at the video and myself, I just think it's another guy. I don't really fully understand that that was me, and I don't know if I ever will. Sometimes that's hard for my family to watch, but it's something that I have to learn to live with. You have to understand that you're corralled, and you have to live within that little section. And so I've tried to do that. But anytime you try to break through it, you open yourself up to injury and who knows what. So I try to be careful. That's the best I can say.
In the documentary, as you are reorienting yourself to familiar faces who happen to be your family and your wife, as you're trying to get your bearings by looking in the mirror, there are deeply emotional times where you break down and cry. Do you remember those emotions of confusion? Do you remember any of that?
The moments of crying and everything was, I can't remember what the name of it is, but I had no control over my emotions. My aunt died and I went to a wake, and I started laughing out loud, and they had to take me out. And there's other times where I would just burst out crying. So I got medication for that, and that was very, very good, because not only was I in that shape, but the people around me sometimes just didn't know what to do. When you have a brain injury like this, they teach you to listen, to think, and prepare what you're going to say, and then say it. But when you're doing it in real life, you got to be quick. And sometimes I come out with things that I shouldn't have because of the frontal lobe injury. But I've learned to more or less corral that.
So, Tim, back to you for a minute. With this accident, you found yourself immediately filming right there in the ICU.
Yeah, I started with my iPhone, pulled that out when he was in a coma, more so just to get through the moment. There's something that happens as a filmmaker that it helps to just like digest or just be in the moment, make sense of it. My dad taught me how to use a camera. That's kind of goes back to Tod in a lot of ways with me even having the idea to be a filmmaker. And I was in that moment now to just kind of film for whatever. Then, day 8, he opened his eyes slightly and started to communicate through his eyes. He couldn't talk. He couldn't move at all. But we knew he was there because he said, Dad, blink the amount of kids you have. And he blinked 4 times. And so we knew right then and there he's inside. He's somewhere in there. It's just going to take some time.
Having pulled out a camera that first day, Tim began filming more and more as time went on. In the documentary, we get to see intimate scenes of struggle and support and encouragement, and a lot of wondering about Tod's future and that of his family.
As he started to talk a little bit, and he was super confused, hey, what's going on, or whatever, we had to tell that story a bunch of times, hey, you hit your head, you're going to be okay, blah, 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 all that. Well, meanwhile, if he was having a down moment, we could open the laptop right there and say, hey, last week you couldn't move your head. You couldn't move your arm. Now you're doing that. You're making progress.
Wasn't there right up front a period of time in which your family thought the worst might happen, and you probably thought, I'm filming his last moments?
Definitely. There's 2 or 3 days in a coma for his type of injury was kind of expected. But right at day 3, that's when things were starting to get some different types of conversations from the doctors. And each day, it just wasn't good. Day 7 was a tough day because we're at the point where, we can keep him on, we can keep him hooked up, but it's not looking good.
You actually, as family members, said your final goodbye before pulling the plug?
Everyone probably went about it differently. I went in there and I didn't say my full goodbye, but, I just tried to make peace with him. I think we're all pretty hopeful people, but I think all the siblings and my mom had different moments of saying goodbye. I think all of us were kind of at the point where we're starting to think about, yeah, this is it. I mean, when you have a priest come in and do last rites, it's kind of real.
What I haven't yet told you about Tim's full-length documentary is that capturing video for it took more than a decade. Over these many years, he tracked his father's progress, captured weighty family discussions, consultations with neurologists and nurses. Tim did not shy away from tense, emotional moments. And maybe above all else, he captured the way in which Tod became, and the family gradually became acquainted with, a remarkably changed person. Not an entirely new person, but a very different one with many new qualities to admire. Tod's is a story of blessings mixed in with the setback. It's a story of gaining a bold and bright new outlook on life, but with much to grieve in the way of lost functionality and lost memories. And now here's another layer compounding the setback of the accident taken by itself. Mother Gail O'Donnell, together with adult siblings TJ, Aaron, Tim, and Angela, simultaneously had to deal with the bank's foreclosure on their old family home. The house we lived in, past tense, is the title of Tim's documentary. The loss of that cherished home, and for Tod, the loss of all the memories it contained, 2 decades worth of memories, was painful for everyone. I'm Marcus Smith, and you're listening to Constant Wonder. Embark on a whimsical journey with The Appleseed and host Sam Payne. It's one of many shows from the BYU Radio family of podcasts. Wrap yourself in captivating stories, expertly woven by talented storytellers. You'll hear live studio audiences taking immense delight in a broad tapestry of tales, some humorous, others poignantly reflective. The Appleseed is always a family-friendly experience. It sparks imagination, creative enough to make fiction feel like fact, and bring real-life events back to life. The Appleseed. Listen wherever you get your podcasts. We now return to Constant Wonder. The O'Donnell home, containing over 20 years of memories, was in the quiet neighborhood in Hudson, New Hampshire. During his months of rehab, Tod was shown old family videos that had been taken there, out in the yard and pool, good times of laughter and shouting and splashing, lots of friends in the mix. And the idea of showing him these scenes on a laptop was, at least figuratively speaking, to help bring Dad, if not back to that very house, then at least to bring him back home.
Once he was stabilized at the hospital in the ICU, he was then moved. We got very lucky. He was moved into Spalding Rehab, which is one of the best places for folks with brain injuries. And we spent months there. Early on, he was so sharp. He knew everyone. He was telling stories, same humor, the whole thing. But as time went on, we asked more and more questions. We started to realize that he just couldn't remember the house we lived in. At the same time, which was also kind of a challenge, we lost the house. My parents ran into some financial troubles. Banks are banks. We couldn't say, hey, Bank of America, my dad's in a coma. Do you mind if we stay in our house for 2 weeks? They don't care. So we had to literally go to the house while my dad's in a coma and unpack. And it was certainly tough. But, as he was coming to, you could just tell it was kind of like he just couldn't put his finger on it. And that whole entire chunk of 2 decades, he could not remember anything centering around the house.
It wasn't just that, though. Several other swaths of his past life experience had evaporated from his mind. Golf, for instance. For 50 years, Tod had been not just an avid golfer, but very good. So good that in earlier days he had set his sights on a professional golfing career and had even moved the family to Texas to try to break into the circuit.
He just couldn't remember the sport, but everything else was right then and there, even super duper specific, things about wrestling tournaments or, very abstract stories. He on the money, but those two things for some reason were just kind of not there.
The O'Donnells wanted the old dad back, and they did what any of us might do. Would it be possible, they wondered, to jog his memory, to elicit gradually from Tod those missing pieces tucked somewhere, as we often like to say, in the recesses of the mind? So, once Tod was well enough for excursions away from the Spalding Rehab Hospital, they headed out.
First one was me, my older brother TJ, and my dad, and we went to the old house. Now, at this point, they didn't sell it right away, and there was, real estate person we were in touch with that allowed us to come in, and they were kind of showing the house. So, we had this moment, and it's in the film, where you get to see Tod for the first time go through, and wow, what an experience, for all of us in some ways. But Dad, what about you? What was sort of your impression, going back to the house for the first time?
Well, I must have remembered something because when I went up the steps to come in, I looked at the yard and I said, whoever lives here, they need to get a gardener or something. It looks awful. But I had that connection to keeping the yard and everything clean. And then I went into the kitchen and, it's just a kitchen. I mean, was I there? Maybe so. I don't know. When I went upstairs, I knew where Timmy, his room and my daughter's room, but when I went into my room, I said, it's just a room. I mean, then I looked around and said, how could somebody fall and hurt their head so bad? It's just a carpet. And so different things I remember. When I saw the pool, it kind of brought back that we probably had a good time. And I remember watching the kids swim. Something had happened that triggered something. It says, I guess you were there. Like when I smelt the grass or when I was mowing the lawn or different things of that nature, but it was always outside of the home. All during this time, I'm looking at myself and saying, why can't you remember this?
You did remember something very specific, though, and it was a creature from the backyard.
Oh, yeah. I got a rabbit for my daughter. We used to call him buckwheat. When my daughter Angela went to school, the rabbit would run out and stay there with the kids, and when the bus took off, he'd come back. I mean, it was crazy. So I remember things like that because they were quirky.
What was your reaction to realizing that your family was saying, hey, these things happened, and you said, but I have no evidence of that. I don't have any memories. How did you cope with that kind of a disconnect between what they were saying had been real and you didn't know about?
Well, when you go through a brain injury, your emotions are all over the place. Your memories of what took place, they may be there, but you're not connected to them.
As a prime example of this disconnection, a sort of dissociation from the self, Tod told me about No Quit. No Quit is a short 18-minute piece that Tim produced using excerpts from video he had captured in the early stages of the crisis. This short film became a major springboard that launched Tod into his current role as a brain injury advocate. No Quit was launched at a benefit event organized in Tod's behalf where 700 people showed up, all from the large circle of Tod's friends and associates.
We raised a ton of money, and as we were thinking about, raising money for, all these new costs, all these new challenges, we also felt like we needed to share what happened to Tod. So that event happens, and the next day, my family said, "Hey, put it online." I wasn't intending to put it online, but they were like, "No, put it online, share it with friends and family who couldn't make the event." So I did that, and I just put it on Vimeo. I didn't put it on YouTube or anything, and I didn't really promote it. And I got a call 2 weeks later from somebody that said they're from ESPN. And I'm like, this is one of my friends pulling my leg. Okay, ha ha ha. Well, they ended up adapting our film and broadcast it a few times. It was pretty cool experience. And, right then and there, my dad became a brain injury advocate early on, which was really powerful because, we had this short film that he could go and show and talk to folks. And I think that's part of his mission as an advocate, and talk to folks about his journey.
When I watched my movie first, No Quit, I looked, I said, who the hell is that guy? It wasn't me, but it was. I knew all the members around me. So I think it's a protective, something protective in the mind that only allows you to remember things in different ways. My oldest son, TJ, had a theory, and I think it's proven that the things you can't go back to, you don't remember.
As much as TJ's theoretical explanation might, on the face of things, appeal to us, still, neurologists working with Tod's case of traumatic brain injury always remained very tentative when it came to any questions that relate to the way an injured brain may or may not filter out this or that memory.
We have 3 billion or 300 million brain cells. Which ones were severed and need to go back, doctors don't know. So different things come back in different ways. I think memories come back in the form of dreams. It's the only thing I can think of. I would inform my family when I woke up that I had dreamed about this or dreamed about that.
Tim, do you remember him saying, I had a dream?
You probably wouldn't go up to somebody and be like, hey, tell me about your dream, or, tell me about this memory coming back. But somehow the camera, it just created an excuse. There was plenty of times where I happened to be there in the morning and he started talking about this dream and we're like, that's a memory. But a lot of it came from Gail. Gail would call us and say, hey, Tod just had this dream. And wow, that's so cool. There's moments in the film too where you hear about his golfing in Texas. Those things were the first to kind of come back. It was pretty exciting. Hey, things are coming back, because we wanted it all to come back and have the movie script ending. But obviously that's not, really, we don't want that, because we want Tod the way he is, as he is now.
Tod recalled for us a bit earlier how smelling grass or a mowed lawn seems to have done the trick for him. Not bringing back full-fledged memories, but fragments. This was particularly true when it came to his lifetime of playing golf. Most all of us know how our sense of smell can really take us back, as the expression goes.
I guess my memory comes back in pieces. Like when I was out on the golf course smelling the grass, it came back. That I had played for, I don't know, now it's been 61 years later. And I remember being out on the golf course with Tim, he was filming, and I said, watch out. And he said, for what? And I says, there's going to be balls coming at us. And he looked at me and says, there's nobody hitting them, Dad. So what I did was I caddied for my father, and that's where I used to stand when I was a caddy. And I guess that was a memory coming back.
What did not necessarily come back with his memory of golf was a desire to play again.
Sometimes it's very difficult. I lost all my satisfaction on a lot of things. I play golf maybe once or twice a year now, but doesn't mean much to me. And, I used to socialize. I was a manufacturer's rep. I drove 50,000 miles a year. And after all this happened, obviously I couldn't drive. I couldn't get out there. I didn't have a job anymore. So the realistic view of yourself then comes into play. And I was very, very fortunate to have a great wife. I do have a great wife that supported me. She was my number one cheerleader. And 4 great kids. Who would think that your son was going to film the last days of your life? I mean, how do you even face that?
By now, I hope it's clear that we're visiting with Tod O'Donnell 2.0. Tod has described his experience as a rebirth, Tim calls him a whole new version. And a central feature of the new Tod is his positivity. Not all brain injuries manifest themselves this way. It's pretty much a wild card. There's a wide range of outcomes.
You meet folks that are brain injured, and of course, brain injury means a lot of different things. We saw folks who couldn't move their bodies and had different devices to communicate. People similar to my dad that, if you met them at a grocery store, you might have no idea that they've had a brain injury. But there is a lot of common themes that you see. And I think there's this humanity, their new kind of view on life. We all kind of gained that from Tod, this whole new version. They explained to us after the brain injury, there's just going to be different things where he might say something out loud that he otherwise wouldn't, not having a filter. And yeah, maybe that's problematic, but that's also beautiful, especially at that age, when you have financial troubles and you go through all this in life. I mean, you could be a pretty sad, depressed human, and no fault to that, right? It's a really beautiful thing. He allowed all of us to kind of go on this journey with him. He's talking, so positively, but he's been through a lot, man. He's been through so much in life, and he's found a way to be optimistic. And am I proud of my dad, for all these things? Of course, but the way he reacts is like the thing that I hold the most to, and I try my hardest. I'm never going to be as great as my dad in so many ways, but like, just try having that kind of like key, that model there to go after now, like, is huge. And just, control the controllables, react as best you can. And, but yeah, he's a quote machine, everything he says is gold.
Remarkable optimism has indeed emerged in Tod's character and personality as he's gotten back on his feet after this medical crisis and rehab. Something else and sort of inexplicable has also surfaced for Tod during this season of reinventing himself, and nobody seems to be able to say where this thing came from. It's a fairly pronounced obsession he has with the vastness of the universe, with outer space. Tim's documentary goes there, and we will in just a moment, too, here on Constant Wonder. I'm Marcus Smith.
We hope you're enjoying this podcast from BYU Radio. I'm Stephen Cap Perry, host of In Good Faith, an interfaith podcast committed to listening as believers of many traditions share their personal experience with the sacred and the divine. And we've just dropped our 200th episode. Why not take a moment to check out In Good Faith at byuradio.org or wherever you get your podcasts. I think you'll be inspired by our amazing guests sharing first-person accounts of the power of faith and belief on the In Good Faith podcast.
In a perfect world, rehab would mean total restoration. But Tod has not fully returned to his former self and likely never will. He's just a very different person in significant ways. For example, he experiences the world around him almost as though he's now living in some other dimension. He describes it as a bubble.
I'm in a different world now. I mean, the rules for me are different. I couldn't live in your world. I couldn't. I can see your world, and I can try to get out of the bubble I'm in, but I can't do it. So I accept a lot of things. I look at everybody around, and they can drive, and they have cars, they have a job, they have houses, they have this and that, and I don't have that. Instead of taking care of everybody, they're taking care of me. And I see that. One part of me is very glad, and the other part is sad, because now I'm going back like I was 9 years old, and I got to start growing again. Is it going to be a good journey? Maybe so.
After waking from his coma, Tod soon began to manifest a brand new mental focus that bordered on fanaticism. Maybe it was from having been through something like a time warp that set him thinking obsessively about time, distance, and space. With lots of time now given to screens to help pass the time, he was drawn towards science shows, especially to the ones that explore all the wonders of the cosmos. In his previous life, he had never before shown any interest in these. In the documentary, we get to hear Tim asking his dad to explain why this sudden new interest in space.
Just fascinates me how far out things are. Some things, even though we can get the fastest, like the speed of light, you'd never be able to reach the end of the universe for billions and billions of light years. I mean, it's inconceivable.
Why do you think you're like so fascinated by it now versus like before?
Maybe I'm like a 9-year-old kid and just fascinated by it because I'm starting my life over again.
But to me, this doesn't sound exactly like the childlike wonder of a 9-year-old. There's an element of sadness and also something deeply philosophical about Todd's sudden new attention to space.
The reason I think I had that space because I feel that I was up on the clouds somewhere and somebody made a decision that I have to come back down. And in looking at space, I just feel like I'm there. I'm in a place that I really don't understand. I can look around and see what my wife and I have made and a great family, but I still think I'm somewhere else, part of me. I feel like, I just feel like some part of me is missing, and I don't know what it is.
Do you sometimes feel like the universe is so big and not a single one of us can really have control over things or can really be all that significant even?
I don't know. I try to figure things out in my mind. Why? And there's got to be life. There's got to be maybe 10,000 planets like that we're on that have people or some sort of people. And I always keep wondering about that. Why? I don't know.
I asked Tim about how his father's fascination with space changed the way that he himself takes his bearings on the universe. Tim launched into his answer by first pointing out what his dad happened to be wearing right there during the interview. And that sparked a little playfulness between these two.
Spaceman, look at him. He's got a NASA hoodie on. Look at you. I could never imagine prior to my dad having a traumatic brain injury, even seeing him in a NASA hoodie, it's still surprising. It was pretty cool. Never in a million years would anybody that knew Todd before the injury would say he's into space or anything even remotely near that. We kind of go through these waves of NASA footage, and it is like a obviously kind of great metaphor for the brain, and we don't know much about both things. Do we know a ton about the brain? Yes and no. A lot more unknown. And the same thing about space. It's pretty big and vast and, wavering back and forth between are we alone or are we, a tiny speck. It's sort of good to have both feelings and can really fuel you.
Rocket man, burning out his fuse out here.
If Todd often felt consumed with thoughts about space, he also began to focus on the needs of others like him in support groups for people with brain injuries.
The first support group, there was 3 or 4 of us that had gone through a traumatic brain injury. And we started it because I had nothing when I went through mine. And we started heading it up. I think it was probably 3 years or something like that after it had happened. It was beneficial to those, especially the family. And we'd sit around a table and all the wheelchairs would come up, my daughter Erin and myself and sometimes my wife. And I'd pass up my card and just explain to them that we were going to tell our story. And we went around the room. And if you didn't want to tell your story, that's fine too. And I always remember looking at the brain injured people, and they were not in any shape to respond. But the caregivers, the family, they were devastated. They didn't know what to do. And so slowly but surely, we got quite a crowd. I think I probably hope I helped about 500 people. If I can help people when they go through similar circumstances, I feel good about that.
Back to you for a minute here. Let me ask you this now. Is the family finally coming to some kind of acknowledgement together that there's no going back to the Tod who used to be? And at some point in the documentary, you actually say goodbye to that Tod. What was going through the family's mind or your mind about kind of that acknowledgement? Because I would imagine that for a long time there was a kind of denial.
We definitely thought about that. It's really positive for so many other families out there that maybe go through. It doesn't even have to be a brain injury. It could be a lot of different things. Just allowing yourself to sort of mourn the difference, whatever that may be. It's pretty common in the brain injured community for folks to feel. Early on, it was, wow, your dad woke up. Oh my gosh, he's fine. Sort of thinking about the movie script ending that we've seen where somebody wakes up in a coma and then they're just fine and the credits roll. We had to kind of come to terms years later that, yeah, he definitely died, like a piece of him died. And we should all kind of like acknowledge that.
At this point in our conversation, Tim brought up the opening shot of his film. It's a horse racing track that his father used to frequent. The track was shuttered in 2016, 5 years after Tod's accident. And this mention of the racetrack led us into a sensitive area because Tod's life story includes dealing with many forms of addiction.
It goes back to the Rockingham track in Salem, New Hampshire. Been around for 100 years. And I grew up going there. And yeah, there been a range of addictions that my dad has struggled with, but that place is where I went a lot. And when they closed the door on that place, it felt like closing the door in some ways, metaphorically, to an old part of Tod.
So the gambling is what you're referring to there, and it was a complicated chapter or a facet of who he is.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think of, there's a range of gambling my dad has done, but going to the horse track was very social and fun. Obviously, I'm not condoning that or anything like that, but for us, it was a social thing. It was fun. And as I got older, I saw the value in what he was doing to some degree. And he knows it. We're very transparent. I mean, I filmed my parents at a therapy session with a psychologist. And so, we decided to kind of open the doors on that and really talk about those gray things. And of course, with the brain injury, he had already quit drinking, smoking, all these different things. And gambling was social. And so that was really important. He doesn't work. He doesn't drive. So, and there was a whole community there. But when they closed the doors at Rockingham, and we got access to go in there when it was completely empty and they're setting up the auction, it was kind of apparent to me that this was my picture that I needed to paint, so to speak, to depict what was going on. It's later on in the film that you have that moment of me kind of making peace or saying goodbye, or whatever that may be.
I'm sitting with my 11-year-old daughter. We're watching the documentary. We see Rockingham with a big sign, and letters are missing. The Rock E is gone, and all that's left is the NGHAM. And I saw that, and I thought to myself, this is a metaphor of rupture, the end of something. It's over. Then you have this theme of rebirth and the talk about the new Tod who's come about. So let's conclude here with that rebirth from out of the ruins of like the Rockingham, where half the sign is missing. Tod, do you feel, in some ways you do feel reborn as kind of a new person going forward?
We all have good things we remember, and we have bad things. I'd given up smoking, drinking, God only knows other things, but some of it was probably wrong because you go to an excess. Others, no, because it was a social thing for me. I mean, I was a salesman. It was the only place I could go after many hours on the road with many people and sit down with normal people. People don't have the white shirt and the tie, and you can talk like you want to talk, have a coffee, and play a few races. I felt good when I left there.
Can you tell me something, Tod, about this phrase? I don't know when in your rehab you started thinking in terms of every day as being a gift. There's a sort of a positivity, as the glass is half full rather than half empty. When and why did you start thinking in those terms?
Well, I think you use the term rebirth, and I believe that life today you should be thankful for. Tomorrow is like a present you hope you can unwrap. So be thankful for today, try to do the best you can, help who you can, and hope that tomorrow you'll be able to enjoy it.
And Tim, just having heard what your dad just said, is that the kind of thing he would have said before the accident to you?
I don't think so. Maybe a piece of it, but there's a new version. There's a new insight. My dad's, he's 2.0, and it's an amazing version. We love this version.
One thing I need to pick up on here is you have some sort of pang in your heart about the fact that your wife and daughters wouldn't know Tod 1.0.
Yeah, for sure. I think you gotta be okay with that. I wish they could have experienced Tod and our whole family. But again, in so many ways, it's such a new, beautiful version that you got to be at peace. And now my 6 and 4-year-old are downstairs, and after this, we're going to go hang out. And man, they know we made a movie about this guy. You know, their grandfather. It's also bittersweet, you know, but it's also it's pretty amazing.
Speaking of becoming a new version of the self, or maybe about new chapters, Tim had a troubling chapter that he needed to close in his own life. After his family lost their home, which coincided, as already said, with his father's recovery from his injury, Tim experienced some trauma of his own.
I was having these reoccurring dreams for 9 years, at least a couple times a week, of the old house. And, it's all just metaphor, right, of what's at the heart of my dad changing, of having this thing, not having enough time to maybe catch up to it, and accept it. And so I decided, as part of an exercise creatively, and also maybe to get rid of some of these recurring dreams, I would hire actors, write a script from the dreams, hire actors to play my family, and then film them. And some of those are in the final version. And I think that helped quite a bit, exercise those things. It was also hilarious to call my family and be like, hey, I'm hiring actors to play you guys. And it's like, nonsensical dreams.
In the video stagings of Tim's dreams, you see one in which a young boy seems left all alone with only a flashlight, unable to get inside the house, unable to find the rest of his family. He calls out, "Where are you guys?"
I think it was my brain, my way of making sense of everything, and also maybe kind of making sense of making a film about it. It was literally like when I put together one of the first real cuts of the film, the next day I just stopped having, the dream stopped like that. It was pretty remarkable. And it was me getting to close that chapter a little bit and move on psychologically.
The film has done something valuable for Tod, too.
I will say this, since Tim has made this film, it has opened up so many doors for me. Who would think a guy like me would talk in front of 400 people at Harvard? I couldn't sweep their floors, but they want to all listen to me now. I mean, it's unreal. And all the podcasts, all the places, I feel like I'm doing something that is good in my life. And I want to continue doing this.
Tod O'Donnell is the subject of this new documentary titled The House We Lived In. It's directed by his son Tim O'Donnell, and you can find it streaming on Amazon and Apple TV. This episode of Constant Wonder was produced by Tenery Taylor and by me, Marcus Smith, with production help from Lily Jensen. Sound design and original music by James Call. Constant Wonder is a production of BYU Radio.